Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Well, net migration figures have been released during the week, and no better person to talk about this than Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business. G'day, Leith.
G'day, Clinton. How are you?
I'm good, mate. You're right. These numbers are still scary.
Yeah, they are, mate. So the ABS released their monthly arrivals and departures figures. Now, it's not exactly the same as their net overseas migration numbers, which come out quarterly, but
Right.
it's basically it basically tracks it almost perfectly, and it's their sort of high frequency data. And what we got the September results, and what it showed is that in the first 9 months of 2024, we've had 394,000 net permanent and long-term arrivals arrive in Australia. And that's actually a record. So that's still about 1,200 higher than the same period last year, which was obviously the biggest migration surge in Australia's history. And it was also about 130,000 more than the same period in 2019 before the pandemic. So what this data basically tells you is that immigration's still running red hot, and it's blowing past the Albanese government's migration projections. What I will add, though, is immigration has slowed since March. So it was the first 3 months of this year were red hot, and it has come off a little bit compared to last year since March. But that being said, every single month this year, so all 9 months of this year, have been higher than the corresponding 9 months in 2019 before the pandemic. So we have passed the peak, but it's still red hot migration. And the interesting thing about this, Glenn, is that Coalition frontbencher Bridget McKenzie this week went to the AFR's infrastructure summit on Monday and basically said that the bipartisan approach of high immigration, which has been supported by both Coalition and Labor over decades, is over. And she's basically declared war on the Albanese government and suggested that immigration is going to be a hot button topic for the federal election, which quite frankly, mate, I'm all for, because voters has never been given a say on high immigration. They don't support it. Every single opinion poll that's ever come out has basically said that Australians don't support such high levels of immigration. And it looks like the coalition's broke ranks, and they're going to make this a major election issue. And Bridget McKenzie said that basically it's punishing home buyers, renters, people with mortgages, etc., all for the benefit of universities and big business and the federal budget, basically. So it's good to see, in my opinion. And
arguing that it's contributing to the housing shortage, particularly with people trying to enter the housing market. Yeah, absolutely. So obviously it has a twofold impact there. So the primary reason why Australian house prices have risen, despite the fact we have these very very steep rises in interest rates, is because of this high immigration. So it's pushed up house prices directly. But even worse, if you're a first home buyer trying to save up a deposit for it to enter the market, firstly, you've got the house prices running away from you, which is bad. But also, you're having trouble saving the deposit because your rents are going up massively because of immigration as well. So it's a double whammy if you're a first home buyer. High immigration makes your rents more expensive, which means it takes longer to save a deposit. It's a lot harder. And then also the actual cost of housing keeps going up as well, which then makes it even harder to purchase a house. So it's really a double whammy. What do you think of the idea of having a plebiscite, a public vote on population size? Oh, mate, it is absolutely essential. I've been arguing that point for years in Macro Business. Basically, what the federal government should do is hold a plebiscite at a federal election. So preferably, you'd have it at the May election, but it's not going to happen because, we don't have enough time and Labor wouldn't put it forward. But basically allow Australians to pick what size they want Australia's population to become. So, you can have a pretty simple question saying, with a range of options, and you choose the median of that, and basically ask Australians, how big do you want Australia to be by, say 2050? Do we want Australia of 50 million people, 40 million people? So at the moment we'd be getting close to 40 million under current projections from the Intergeneration Report. But basically we should ask Australians, how big do you want to become? And then based on that answer or that preference from Australians, they can then set the migration policy around it. It's not, none of this is rocket science. That'd be democratic. But instead, we've had, every single opinion poll just about over the last decade has said Australians do not support this. And yet our leaders, the political leaders, media, etc., not obviously not all media, I'm speaking to the media right now, but
generally push this big Australia barrow against the will of the people. And I think that's, undemocratic, and it's also deleterious for living standards.
Wages data came out during the week. And we know that wages have trailed cost of living, or that's why the cost of living has been so difficult, but wages have trailed inflation for a long time now. It's going to take a long time to recover even as if inflation comes down.
Oh, absolutely. Look, so on Wednesday we got the wage price index from the ABS for the September quarter, and what it showed is that wages grew by 0.8% over the quarter, 3.5% year on year. Now that result was actually a little bit less than what economists were expecting, only marginally, but it was also, more importantly, it was a fair bit below what the Reserve Bank had penciled into their latest statement of monetary policy, which they released last week. And the funny thing about it was good old Treasurer Jim Chalmers was out there on Twitter boasting that real wages have grown for 4 consecutive quarters and that, quote, under Labor, Australians are earning more and keeping more of what they earn. I'll tell you this now, Clinton, that is complete spin. So the only reason why real wages have grown is because Labor has doctored the headline consumer price index. So as we know, they've dished out a whole bunch of energy and rent subsidies, and that meant that inflation came in at 2.8% year on year a couple of weeks ago. But the RBA's preferred measure of inflation's underlying inflation, so that gets rid of those distortions. And what that showed is that we had underlying inflation of 3.5%. We got wage growth of 3.5%. Basically, real wages were both flat in the September quarter and year on year. And it's actually worse than that, because if you compare the wage growth of 3.5% against the Australian Bureau of Statistics Employee Cost of Living Index, so that's basically it measures the cost of living for employee households, so households that are headed by a worker, which is how you should compare it. The cost of living rose by 4.7% in the year to September, which is more than 3.5% wage growth. So the Australians are still going backwards. And the disturbing thing about it is, even after this result, if you adjust wages by headline CPI, we're still 6.7% below the June 2020 peak. And if you adjust it by the RBA's preferred measure of underlying inflation, we're still 4.4% below the June 2021 peak. So whichever way you measure it, Australians have gone backwards by quite a long way. And the latest statement of monetary policy released last week by the RBA projected that Australian wages would only recover by 1.2% by December 2026. So that means, and by December 2026, real wages would be at the same level they were in December 2011. So what that effectively tells you is that under the RBA's own projections, by December 2026, Australians will have lost about 15 years of wage gains, because they'll be tracking at December 2011 levels.
Yeah.
So this is appalling stuff. And if you actually, I did the exercise yesterday. If you extrapolate that rate of growth using a straight line from what the RBA's projected going forward, we won't recover until the mid-2030s. We won't be back to our peak level of wages that we had at around 2020 by the mid-2030s.
And we're now
just crazy.
Yeah, and we're now seeing the public sector right across the country is venting their frustration against state governments. I know the Victorian police have been protesting in New South Wales yesterday. The nurses were protesting. We have problems on the trains. The police in New South Wales has been given a big pay rise. So lots of industrial action from public sector workers, but the private sector workers don't seem to have a choice. They just have to go along with it and cop it.
No, they don't. And in fact, the last 2 years, we've had almost zero growth in the market sector. So that's basically the private. It's the sector that's not influenced by government spending. And jobs in the market sector over the last 2 years have only grown by 1.2%. But in the non-market sector, so that's your public sector plus your private sector providers that are funded by government, so NDIS type roles, jobs growth has been about 12%. So pretty much all of Australia's jobs growth in the last 2 years has been in the non-market sector. So we've got basically an economy whereby the private sector is stuffed, to be quite frank. It's not growing. It's growing by less than the population growth, so it's shrinking in real terms. And at the same time, we've got this chronically low productivity and this lower wage growth. And based on the Reserve Bank's own forecast, as I just said, by December 2026, we're going to be back to 2011 levels. So we would have recovered only 1.2% to be back to December 2011 11 level. So we would have lost 15 years of wage gains.
Amazing. Whoever.
And yeah, and we're basically, based on the extrapolation, we won't be back to where we were at the peak of 2020 by about 2035. So this is pretty, this is lost decade stuff for Australians.
This changes the workforce. Good to talk to you, mate. We'll catch up next week.
Thanks, Glenn.
Luke Van Olsen from Macro Business.